Okay, hello everybody. Today I am coming from Saranac Lake from the Adirondack Park Invasive Plant Program. My name is Emily. I am the program's Education and Outreach Coordinator, and I'm glad to be with you here today, even though it's digital. Today we're going to talk about invasive animals of the Adirondacks. Little trail map for where we're going. We're going to talk about the concepts of biodiversity and introduce what an invasive species is. We're going to talk about top invasive animals to know in the Adirondacks. And we're going to learn about ways to prevent the spread and take action to help our environment. Also, I'll note that your teacher will have my email and I can answer questions for you all afterwards if you have any questions. So chapter 1, biodiversity and invasive species. What does biodiversity mean? So if we break that word up a little bit, bio means life. You might have heard of it with biology. So that means life. Diversity means variety. So combined, biodiversity means a variety of living things on Earth or on planet Earth. And today we're going to talk about biodiversity in the Adirondacks. Biodiversity is important for a plethora, many reasons why. Diverse habitats create a number of priceless ecosystem services that help plants, people, and animals and the world around us. Diverse habitats can create food for everybody in the ecosystem, including people. Shelter, for instance, my house is made of wood. Wood comes from plants, comes from trees. Oxygen, many of us, including myself, need oxygen to breathe. I think maybe some of you do as well. A diverse habitat can also clean and store water. So we all need water to live. A biodiverse habitat can also feed the soil. Without healthy, rich soil, our plants can't live. And without plants, we can't really live either. And it strengthens habitat. A biodiverse habitat is stronger together against things like climate change or a storm or a flood or temperature shifts. So biodiversity has so many different benefits. It's hard to measure them all. There's a lot of biodiversity in the Adirondacks. So we have a lot of wetland habitats that are full of large mammals like moose or beaver, amphibians, pollinators like monarch butterfly, or even hummingbirds are pollinators too. Songbirds, larger birds that hunt fish, and even larger birds that hunt fish with the osprey. And lakes, our systems are really diverse. We have lots of different native floating aquatic plants and lots of waterfowl that use those plants to find food. Many different types of pollinators use those aquatic plants as well. And lots of different types of fish or even people use lakes and aquatic ecosystems for food or for fun. And forests are diverse habitats as well. We have large mammals again. We have lots of different types of native plants that come up at different types of seasons. Porcupines, everybody loves porcupines, and our bears. Where would we be without the trees to have all of this shelter for a lot of our mammals to survive, say, the winter, like we got 6 inches of snow? And that brings me to the idea of invasive species. So we have lots of diverse native habitats full of native species. What are invasive species? Invasive species are plants and animals brought from one place to another through human processes. So human behavior, human activity like trade or travel or transit. And these invasive species can sort of put a diverse native habitat out of shift. So they can cause harm to people. So if it might cause a rash or it might cause a food that I eat to disappear because it's been outcompeted by an invasive species, I'm going to be hurt, or human community can be hurt or damaged, but also can cause a lot of damage to ecosystems. So different animals and plants within a food web. It can change different soil structures. It can change light conditions. It can change water conditions. So a plant doesn't necessarily have to be invasive for it to be non-native to an area, but in order to be considered invasive, it has to cause harm. So it's okay if, say, we have dandelions that don't cause harm to anybody, but if we have species that are brought to a different area by human activity that do cause harm to people or eat plants and animals, that's when we define it as an invasive species. So let's look a little bit more at the impacts of invasive species on Adirondack habitats. I'm gonna skip this video so we have enough time. Oh, no, we're not. Let's jump forward to how invasive species can damage Adirondack habitats. In a wetland, because they create so many seeds, sometimes invasive plants can rapidly outgrow native plant life, leading to less key food sources for pollinators, animals, and people, like we just looked at. So a non-native purple loosestrife can dominate, create a monoculture over this once biodiverse habitat. Or reed canary grass can destroy a habitat as well by creating a monocrop. So there's no more room for native plants and animals there's physically no more room, but there might not be nutrients in the soil left over for anybody else, or water for anybody else, or physical space for anybody else to grow and thrive in a diverse habitat. So we're losing diversity here. What about in lakes? Aquatic plants without their native predators, which might be fish, and that is invasive aquatic plants without their native predators, could take out an entire lake ecosystem like we just saw. They can block out space, it can block out light, and it can take up all the oxygen available in an ecosystem and not leave any other resources for native fish, plants, or other animals like we saw amphibians before. So there's invasive water chestnut, which will physically block out an entire surface of the lake, or even European frogbit, which does the same. Ooh, or milfoil, and nobody wants to swim in that milfoil. So that'll go all the way down to the bottom of the lake. So it's not just floating on the surface, it's taking up the whole thing. And in forest ecosystems, without limitations from, say, native climates where it might be colder or warmer from where we are now, or soils that might have more nutrients or less nutrients, or might be acidic or more basic, invasive plants can easily carpet a forest floor or even smother the canopy and prevent lots of native flowers or different berries or food types or food plants for larger animals to grow. And so we'll have a loss of diversity there because we're losing our food web. In other cases, invasive insects that lack predators can grow to such numbers that when they're feeding and nesting behaviors can kill entire populations of trees. So we're going to talk a little bit about that in a minute. But there's a lot we can do. So everything I just mentioned is pretty much a huge bummer. Invasive animals and invasive plants sound really problematic. They sound really, really damaging, and they seem really harmful to our environment and biodiversity. And that's pretty sad. However, because I also mentioned that invasive species typically come to new areas through human behaviors, we're human, and our behaviors can help positively impact the environment as well, because we can slow the spread through changes in our behavior. There's a lot we can do, so we're going to talk about that now. First off would be knowing what to look for. So now you know about some of the impacts of invasive species, but if you don't know what they are, you can't go find them out in the environment. We're going to talk about just a little bit about reporting, and then we're going to talk about preventing the spread, because there's a lot you can do, even if you're a kid. You don't even have to be in high school to do this. So first off is animals to know. We're not going to talk too much more about plants. We're going to mostly talk about animals, although they're never quite apart from each other in my mind. I love plants. First off is the emerald ash borer. So given its name from this metallic green color of its wings, the emerald ash borer came to North America through international trade in the 1980s to North America. I believe starting in Michigan, but I could be wrong, sorry. Emerald ash borer are really, really small insects. They don't fly very far, though they have wings. They can only fly about 6 city blocks, so they're typically moved through human activity. They lay their eggs right behind the bark. So if you look here, this is the bark that's been stripped away from this ash tree. and they lay their eggs behind the bark, and their eggs and their larvae make these sinuous, kind of like river-shaped, winding S-shaped channels on the inside of the tree, where the tree's water and sugars are really where it's traveling the most. And so by carving those lines, it's disrupting the way that the tree can move water and sugar around its body in order to maintain homeostasis, or not homeostasis, but stasis, and keep itself alive. And so over time, the activities of the emerald ash borer, and they're called borers because they drill little holes through the ash's thick gray furrowed bark in order to get in and out. So they're drilling or boring little holes. All of that activity can break down a tree, and which can sadly lead to once healthy big stands of ash tree dying prematurely. So it's really damaging, and these insects are starting to come to the Adirondacks. Ash are known for their big furrowed bark, their big thick furrowed bark, and they're really important for wildlife to make homes in their cavities. They have these large leaflets that are many different leaves made up into one leaf, like a frond. And you can tell when emerald ash borer might be behaving or might be present in a tree because of woodpecker activity. So if there's a lot of woodpecker activity, or if trees are losing their leaves really early, like in the summer when they're not supposed to lose their leaves, or if you see these little holes when the emerald ash borer bores back out, the holes are shaped like the letter D, which is kind of distinctive, though they're really, really tiny because you can see this finger here. Then you might unfortunately have some emerald ash borer around. And as I mentioned, they travel on their own. The emerald ash borer can only move about 6 blocks on its own. And so they travel on firewood, most likely often firewood. So don't move firewood. We'll talk about that in a minute. And through moving timber. But I don't expect any of you guys are moving timber anytime soon. But firewood is really important. Invasive jumping worms are pretty nasty, gross little worms that are new to our area as well and invasive. I'm going to play this little video just so you can see how they move. They move really, really, really fast. They're not like any other earthworm you've ever seen. They literally jump. They eat tons of soil and organic matter every day. And so in and of itself, the jumping worm is really no big problem, except that they eat so much that they can destroy roots of plants or bulbs from plants that grow in early spring, or they can eat so much of the soil that the soil destabilizes and trees can fall down. So one way you can recognize that, other than the movement, so that movement, don't forget that movement, it's nasty, it's fast, it's gross, is this little band on an earthworm. Because there's many different types of earthworms, but invasive jumping worms have a white band at the top, close to their head or their anterior side. And this band, also called a clitellum, it's bright white and it's also smooth against the worm. It's not bumped up like with other earthworms that you'll often see. Its body is also kind of shiny and metallic. So if you're out angling or fishing, make sure you're not buying by accident jumping worms when you're going out with your family to go fishing. They're very, very metallic in color, and they have this white band and they jump, and they're super gross. You can also be sure to prevent the spread of invasive jumping worms by cleaning your shoes, because they can often travel in mud stuck on your shoes or on your bike or on pets or on your car. So their eggs are embedded in that soil. And we'll talk a little bit more about that too. But fishing and making sure your boots are clean are really key ways to keep this critter from getting out into the environment. Zebra mussels are a pretty famous invasive animal in North America, and they are also making their way to the Adirondacks from the Great Lakes region. They're pretty small. They're about 1 inch in length. They are also shaped like the letter D, and they're striped almost like a zebra. So they damage things in a couple different ways. I believe they were brought here from Asia, also through trade, but not on purpose. As a pet, they were brought secretly or invisibly on boats when boats would cross oceans or lakes. Their eggs, and when they're juveniles, are invisible to the naked eye, and they're floating in the water as if it's a type of zooplankton. Like you've heard of that with large whales eat zooplankton. Well, when zebra mussels are an egg or a juvenile, they're also considered zooplankton. They can cover a beach. They can cover anything they touch. That's why you see the shopping cart here. They can destroy marinas, they can destroy boats, they can destroy a lake bottom with their huge populations. They can also really hurt people. Their incredibly sharp shells can cut your feet. They can cut your hands, they can cut your legs, they can cut pets. So it's really important to make sure, because they're invisible and they'll travel on your boats, to always clean, drain, and dry your boats or your life jacket or your paddle when you're going out and having fun on the water in the warm, in the summer. Some more pictures of zebra mussels for a second. They're pretty tiny. They can grow on top of other clams and native mollusks as well. And so they'll start to really damage other organisms that live permanently in the water column. They can even grow on turtles, which is a major bummer because turtles are awesome. They can clog up water cleaning technology that's used by different cities to bring us drinking water. And that goes into people's taxes, and people hate paying taxes, and it's this whole big thing. But in terms of damaging the ecosystem, invasive zebra mussels can also, it's funny because we think, oh, cleaner water seems good. But in this case, it's actually pretty harmful to local lakes because every lake is unique. Zebra mussels are filter feeders, so they take in water and they clean out other types of zooplankton, and they put water back out that is cleaner than it was before. But when that water's cleaner, sunlight can go deeper into a lake. It can penetrate deeper than it usually would. Usually water's pretty dark and devoid of light when you go really far down. And so when that light hits the deeper sections of the lake can warm up. And that warmer environment is actually really, really damaging to native fish and plants that evolved living in a cold ecosystem. So let's get into taking action now that we've learned about our animals. As I mentioned, a lot of these organisms are getting to the Adirondack Park on people, on our shoes, or on our cars, or on our boats, or on our pets. And so it's, or through our trade, right? Our landscaping plants or our firewood. So we can prevent the spread of invasive species if we pay attention to our behaviors that bring invasive species to our area. So if you're boating, you might have invasive species on your boat. If you're fishing, you might have bought invasive species as your bait. If you're hiking, you might have invasive species on mud on your shoes. And if you're camping, if you haven't cleaned your gear properly from the last time you went camping with your family, or if you bought firewood from a much further away region where, say, they do have invasive insects, you could bring them to a new area. So when you're boating, pay attention if you have plants on there. Pay attention of how clean your shoes are. These things are really important. It's not just your parents telling you to. Where did your firewood come from? Try to buy it locally. Encourage your parents or your family or whoever you're with to buy your firewood locally to where you're going to go camping or hunting or fishing or just hanging out with family. And don't buy rusty crayfish as live bait. I don't think we got into rusty crayfish. It's also an invasive species. So with your boat, use the boat wash stations. You see signs for them all around. In the summertime, clean, drain, dry your boat. Wash it off with water, drain water from the boat from when you were using it, drain it from the motor, and let it dry out in the sun to kill invasive insects and plants. Clean your shoes, keep your shoes clean. Use a boot brush station or wash your shoes off with a hose when you get home so that you're not carrying invasive seeds or insect eggs around on your shoes when you go and hit the trail. We go hit the trail because we love the trail, we love the forest. So let's protect the forest by keeping our shoes clear of seeds and insects. Don't move firewood, I can't emphasize this enough. And if you see gear wash stations, if you're fishing and have your waders, use those. So keep your clean, drain, and dry your fishing gear just as you would your boat, because there might be invisible invertebrates that you cannot see, but you don't want to bring from lake to river to stream to lake to river to stream. And this is how we can protect biodiversity in our area. I'm going a little long, so I'm going to hurry it up. The last thing you can do is report sightings. So now that you've all been trained in what these invasive animals are, make observations out in the ecosystem. Be on the lookout. When you're out in the woods, you're there to help protect the woods. And if you see anything, you can report it. You can go to our website, which is at www.adkinvasives.com, or find APIP on Facebook at ADK Invasives. And we're on Instagram at ADK_invasives. Your teachers will have my email, but go to adkinvasives.com to learn about different invasive species, find resources for educators, or to report an invasive species that you found in your region. The end. Thank you. Have a good day and make sure to prevent the spread of invasive species in your area.